All right, welcome everyone. I call the May 4, 2022 Planning Commission meeting to order. The main purposes of tonight's meeting are election of chair and vice chair, briefings on the bike plan and King County planning policies, and a study session on Canyon Park transfer of development rights. Before we move on to the agenda items, I'd like to acknowledge our remote meeting format. As with our previous meetings, the commissioners and staff will be participating via Zoom. During this Zoom meeting, the chat and question functions are not available for use to ensure compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act. We have a public comment agenda item at the beginning of the meeting. This time is for comments on issues not on tonight's agenda. Please limit these comments to 3 minutes. Under Governor Inslee's Proclamation 20-28 regarding open public meetings, this meeting will be held remotely. Public comment will be allowed both in writing and orally. The Imagine Bothell notice, city website, and tonight's agenda all provided information to the public for providing comments. People wishing to comment were instructed to notify staff and provide written comments by 3 p.m. today. The video of this meeting will be streamed live as well as recorded and available for later viewing on the city's YouTube channel. A call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone to listen live to the meeting. For our phone-in callers, during staff presentations, staff will make every effort to specify which materials they are referencing so that everyone may follow along. Those who provided advance notice are able to make comments under the audience comment portion of the meeting. Email was encouraged as well and will be acknowledged. At this point, we have not received any email. At this point, we'll take a moment to acknowledge the attendance of the commissioners, and in order of position number, I will call the attendance. Commissioner Dodd.
Present.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
Present.
Commissioner Curd.
Here.
Commissioner Robson.
Here.
Commissioner Anders.
Here.
And Commissioner Gustafson.
Here.
All commissioners are here this evening. I'd also like to acknowledge, in addition, staff in attendance. We have Senior Planner Nathan Lamb, Steve Morikawa, Capital Division Manager, and did we have Sherman with us?
I don't see him in the attendee waiting room, and I hadn't heard from him. Steve, have you heard from Sherman?
Yeah, I'm going to have to pinch it for Sherman. He's having problems with his connection and everything.
Okay, I'm sure you will ably fill in for him. So we look forward to the presentation. So lastly, before we begin, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. For all attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking, and please remember to unmute when it's time to speak. If you are also streaming the live video feed, please turn the sound off as there is a delay. For commissioners, at specific breaks in the presentation, I'll be calling on members who wish to speak or ask a question. If you wish to speak, please indicate that by either using the yellow speaker cards or using the raise hand function, and I will call on you as I see you, and I'll look for Senior Planner Lamb to also help me see if there's someone raising their hand that's not in the scroll in front of me. Please mute your microphone when not speaking. And again, identify yourself before you ask a question, make a motion, second a motion, or participate in debate. So with that, we'll move on. Our first item on the agenda is public comment. In keeping with Governor Jay Inslee's Emergency Proclamation 20-28 regarding public gatherings and open public meetings, the city has accepted visitor comment in writing as well as accepted sign-up sheets for those who wish to speak at tonight's meeting. Written comments submitted to staff no later than 3 p.m. today were forwarded to all commissioners and are part of the record, and as I indicated, we have not received any to my knowledge. This time is for items not on tonight's agenda. Senior Planner Lamb, have there been any comments received?
No, Mr. Chairman, I haven't received any comments.
And anyone in the waiting room or otherwise attempting to get in?
Nope, nobody waiting, nobody attempting to get in. I think we're good to go.
All right, well, thank you. So with that, we'll move on and assume that there are no public comments. The first item we have, the next item before us then is the approval of minutes, the April 20th meeting. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
Aye.
Oh. Commissioner Robson,
Vote to approve.
move to approve. Is there a second? Commissioner Westerbeck, would you like to second?
I second the motion.
Okay, it has been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the April 20th meeting. Is there any discussion around those minutes? Seeing none, no need for any modifications or changes. So all in favor of approving those minutes, please indicate. I can see you all, and we have a unanimous vote to approve the minutes. So the minutes of the April 20th meeting are approved. The first item of new business before us is election of chair and vice chair. And I have here the bylaws and rules of procedure of the commission. So I thought I'd start out reading the duties of the officers. We'll do the chair first. And pursuant to section 5 of the bylaws, the chair shall provide at all meeting and public hearings of the commission and shall call special meetings when the chair deems it necessary or is required to do so. Robert's Rules of Order notwithstanding, the chair shall be a full voting member of the commission and be able to participate fully in its activities, with the exception of making and seconding motions. The chair shall sign all official correspondence of the commission unless designated to another member. So those are the duties of the chair. With that, I'll open it up for a nomination for chair. Commissioner Dodd.
Thank you, Chair Kiernan, and I would nominate you to continue being chair.
Well, thank you. I'm pausing. I think we get a second and then see if there are other nominations. So, well, are there other? It's not a motion. I should have looked into this a little more. Is there a second for that motion?
I will second the motion.
Okay, Commissioner Westerbeck, second. Any other nominations for chair of the commission? Seeing none, I think that means by acclamation, I will continue as chair. I'm really hoping to chair this meeting in person soon. I really look forward to seeing you all. So that's something ahead of us. Next item is vice chair, a pretty short description of vice chair. The vice chair shall assume duties of the chair in the chair's absence. So all that other stuff you get to do when the chair is not there. Is there a nomination for vice chair? Commissioner Curd.
I nominate myself for vice chair.
Good. Is there a second?
I second that. I was about to nominate him and he beat me to it.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Andrews seconds. It's been Commissioner Curd has been nominated and seconded as vice chair. Any other nominations for vice chair? Seeing none, we'll have Commissioner Curd again as vice chair this year, and we'll look forward to doing this together.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Reading this, it reminded me that I was not to make motions, so that's why I didn't.
I want to say thank you too for being willing to serve another year. Appreciate it.
I do enjoy it. Thanks. It's a strange thing. Too many years as a bureaucrat, I think. So with that, our next item of business is the bike plan briefing. And Mr. Murakami, would you like to begin the briefing?
I will. Thank you. Let me share a screen, and I apologize that Sherman is not here. Zoom's a little different than MS Teams. Hang on a sec.
Yeah.
All right. Can you all see?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And if I'm not in order with the screen, it's because I had a little bit of notice. But anyway, so thank you all for your time. We know you have a full agenda tonight, and this is a briefing. We know we'll get together and go through this in detail. There's also a public outreach effort that's being kicked off, and that's part of the reason we're talking to you. The intent of the presentation is to give you a brief, kind of like we did to the council last month, just because we're starting a public outreach and we wanted to give you guys some notice on that. We would like to give you a little bit of background, and then we would like to fill you in on what's coming up as well. And I know, again, we won't have time. Everybody wants to delve deeply into the bike plan. We understand that. But this is a briefing and hopefully we can continue the conversation, and this is just the start of it. So a little background on the plan development. We first want to thank you for your patience. We realize that it's taken a long time to get to at least this point, and it's been frustrating for everyone. We actually started a rough outline of the plan about 4 years ago, and we got some great input on it through a couple meetings. I think there were in-person meetings pre-COVID. I think there was a North End meeting and a South End meeting. And we started to address issues being raised and input on the network. And we did get some great input. We focused primarily on infrastructure and fleshing out detail based on what we heard. Unfortunately, over the next few years, there were some major city planning projects that required staff time. And unfortunately, the bike plan suffered. Those are things like Sound Transit 3, BRT had to be coordinated. We had to advocate and go through modeling analysis with them. Similar with WashDOT I-405 express toll lane that was going to support that bus rapid transit. UW Bothell and Cascadia College went through their master plan update, and we had to go through and review and provide input on that. And then the Canyon Park sub-area plan had a large transportation element effort with that as well. So unfortunately, we had to prioritize, and those things couldn't wait. And unfortunately, the bike plan suffered. So we realized there's a gap in the time, in the continuity, and in the public outreach efforts. We felt we needed to reach a certain amount of work to provide the public, the Planning Commission, and the council something to consider rather than just starting all over. A goal was and still is to try to get consensus on the network plan infrastructure to allow the city to compete for upcoming funding as soon as possible. So where we're going, the draft plan was just put up on the website earlier this week. And it represents kind of the beginning of the public outreach phase. We've engaged a public outreach firm to help implement this since resources in-houses are short. Concurrent to the general public being engaged, we're engaging key stakeholders such as adjacent jurisdictions, bike clubs, UW Bothell and Cascadia campus, North Shore School District, and they'll be engaged again to get their input. They were engaged a few years ago as well. In addition to letting people know that the draft plan is available via the website access and there's opportunity to provide comments, a number of stakeholder interviews are going to take place with community-based organizations. And interestingly enough, Commissioner Westerbeck represents the BOPOT group, and he will be one of those being interviewed. It's kind of a detailed list of questions for these community-based organizations. Hopefully we'll get input. Specific input from community areas that we have difficulty typically reaching. It will culminate in a virtual public meeting on May 25th, which will also be available in Spanish and Chinese, including a recording for those who can't attend live. We then plan to come to the Planning Commission as early as July, but it will really depend on the kind of feedback we receive. If everything is going well, July is looking good. If there are major input and changes and concerns and issues, then it might take a little longer to get back to the Planning Commission. The goal is for our council to feel comfortable sometime in the fall to approve of it and essentially amend it with the year's comprehensive plan updates toward the end of the year. So we encourage you to participate as much as possible, not just doing the Planning Commission process. And I would welcome Nathan to weigh in a little bit on this, but if you have an idea on how we can provide information to you, let's say you have questions as you go through the bike plan and it's the public process, but we're not yet meeting with you as a group, please reach out to Nathan and he'll talk to us and we'll figure out how we can have some conversation while we're approaching that. The earlier we get input, the better it is for us as well. We anticipate at least a couple Planning Commission sessions to discuss the draft plan before we run off to council. And again, that's a conversation that maybe I will have with Nathan and maybe he can have with you so we can make sure we plan accordingly. So that's kind of the upfront stuff. What I wanted to do was give you a really high level overview of the plan and the basis for the plan. And realizing, again, this is a brief, I don't want to take too much time. We are going to have a lot of questions, and we're going to have a lot of work to do and a lot of conversation. So in terms of the actual concept of the plan, the goal is to provide a bike plan for most people, not just serious riders. And that's an important goal that deserves thought all of its own, because it has huge implications on how you put the system together. We're not trying to just put a system where those who are commuters or those who are very comfortable on bikes have facilities. We're trying to capture most people, which means a range of people. The latest nationwide bike standards are being incorporated, like NACTO, including such facilities as protected and buffered bike lanes. And the proposed system consists essentially of bike arterials, bike collectors, bike local access facilities. So it's kind of like putting together the old historic way you put streets, but we're putting the system together with, as an example, our North Creek Trail and our East-West Burke-Gilman Sammamish River Trail as spines, so to speak. The level of traffic stress methodology, of which you kind of see a little bit there on the side of this page here, is being used to identify what facility is appropriate ultimately in each part of the bike system. So another reason the preparation of the draft plan took longer than originally anticipated, because of was a consideration of cost. Our final vision does not come easily. It's expensive, and we can talk about that. If we wanted to fund all the projects ourselves, it would probably take north of $100 million or more, probably much more than $100 million. And that's likely a low-end estimate. But what we did was held the vision. We held the vision, but tried to create an implementable plan. And one that's flexible enough to be implemented as quickly or slowly as the city feels it can find it and allocate resources. And ultimately, the city gets its vision. But again, how quickly we get there depends on how many resources we can get and apply for and apply toward this bike plan. So this is where it gets a little bit.
Well, could you pause for a minute? I believe Commissioner Dodd would like to ask a question.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm glad I can ask it while we have this in front of us. So I am definitely one of those casual bikers. I don't really commute anymore, but I don't commute by bike. I bike with my child on the back of my cargo bike. And I noticed we jump from level 1 to 2, 3, and we go from physically separated to painted buffer. And what I would really like to see, and I thought I heard this in a recent council meeting too, is physical barriers between the bike lane and car traffic. So because paint does nothing, of course. So I guess, is this just a draft and maybe that's going to be updated to include that? Or I guess what's the status there?
Okay, that's a great question. So let me go through how this was looked at. So the system was looked at so that we would be able to get to the trail system, which was kind of like our highways. So our North Creek Trail, Sammamish River Trail are our highways. We wanted to get arterials that would connect people to those. So as an example, going up the old 527, Bothell Way, Bothell Urban Highway, that could be considered a bike arterial if you do it correctly. 228 probably is considered another one because that's a good east-west route. The challenge with the city is the same thing with roads, is we have a lot of hills. We don't have a lot of through streets and through places without going through steep slopes and wetlands and rivers and all that kind of things. So the challenge is to try to identify what a good comfort level, an appropriate comfort level is if you have to be next to a road, because we can't build shared use paths through every location in the city from every neighborhood to everywhere. So a lot of the places will have be alongside our roadway because that's where our right of way is. As an example, I always start with 228th and as an example. So 228th Street is an example to me of an arterial that's currently a roadway. It has, unfortunately, a lot of cars and some of them go pretty quick. And right now in our old plan, it's a 5-foot on-street, not even buffered bike lane. So in going through this level of stress, basically, we've identified that it should be a protected bike lane on that facility. So a protected bike lane would mean one of two things. It would be what we call a cycle track. So behind the curb, you have a 5-foot planter strip, then you would have a one-way cycle track, and then you would have a sidewalk. So you would be protected and separated from the roadway. That's what we feel is appropriate for 228th Street. And you would have the same thing on the south side. So you would go in each direction on 228th Street. Another option for 228th Street, which would be protected, would be a shared use path where, let's say on the north side, you have the same thing. You have your curb, you have your 5-foot planter strip, you have a 12-foot shared use path where bikes and peds could use that. That would be another form of a protected bike facility. So that's what we mean by a protected bike facility. We do have some locations where we feel bike lanes, based on this methodology, level of stress, are appropriate. We have other places where we feel buffered bike lanes, which means a 5-foot bike lane plus or minus, plus some sort of buffer there is appropriate without a barrier as well. So that's all kind of laid out in, I think it's a graphic where you have to look color coded to see what this draft plan recommends for particular roadways. And that's part of the things we want to get input on. Does that feel appropriate to people using that particular facility? Obviously, if we're on local roads, there may not be anything more than a shower there, or maybe not even a shower if you're coming out of your neighborhood and you're in a cul-de-sac or something like that. I will go, sorry, yep.
I was just gonna say, no, thank you. I appreciate it. I live off of 228 up by FEMA, so I bike up
Okay.
and down 228 regularly. And actually,
Yeah.
my brother walks on that terrifying shoulder because there's not a lot of crossing, and we're on the side with no sidewalk. So I'm super familiar. And I mean, I would just take a series of bollards. So 5-foot separation sounds even better. So thank you.
Okay. So let me use as an example about Part A and Part B. So that's actually a great segue. And let's continue to use 228th Street as an example. So on 228th Street, we looked at it and we had a couple options in terms of putting a protected bike lane there. If you go on 228th Street now, there's a good long stretch of it intermittently and some of it continuously that has a 5-foot bike lane on it. It's on the roadway. It's not buffered even. It's not protected, but there is a bike facility there. And then there are gaps there where there's nothing. Sometimes there's not even a sidewalk, but sometimes there's no shoulder. And sometimes the road's not even wide enough to pavement to put any kind of bike facility there. So the first thing we did when we looked at what I call Plan A, which would be in our design standards, and if a private developer would come in and have to develop something, this is what the standard would call for. Or if the city were to widen and do a large road improvement project, like the Bothell Way improvement project we're currently working on, this would be the standard we would design for. So in this particular case on 228th Street, what the draft bike plan calls for is a protected bike facility, one on each side. So directional, so to speak. And that was thoughtfully, or at least we think it's thoughtfully put there as that. The other option, like I said, was a shared use path on one side of the road that would go 2 ways. But if you think about it, we already have some facilities there and they're one way on each side of the road. And so if we have private development coming in, let's say we have a 200-foot frontage of a new neighborhood and their frontage requirement is to build protected bike lanes, it's fairly easy to transition from an on-street 5-foot bike lane in one direction onto that off-street protected bike lane and then back down again. If we require them to put a shared use path on one side of the roadway, we would kind of have a gap there. One side would be okay, but the other side would have no facility until such time as the rest of the roadway caught up with it, which could be quite a long time. So the thought there was a protected bike lane in the form of a cycle track on each side of the roadway made sense. So that's Part A. Part A would be primarily done with private development, large infrastructure projects that can get big money. And there's a few projects, if you look in the draft plan, that are kind of standalone bike projects, such as East Riverside Drive Trail. Plan B is a layer on top of that that would assign a certain amount of money every year toward getting certain projects done that would allow us the best connectivity as quickly as we can while Plan A is going on. So in terms of 228th Street, I talked about gaps. There's literally blocks here and there that have no facility. So what we would do is try to find money in Plan A to finish those gaps with protected bike lanes. So once those are done, you actually would have a continuous facility along the entire 228th Street. Yes, a lot of it would be 5 foot on street. The new stuff would be protected behind the curb, but at least in the interim, until those private developers or large road project with a large amount of money comes in, you would have a continuous bike facility. So that's the Plan A and the Plan B part of the bike plan. And it's a concept that's kind of hard to relay. But the reason it's written that way, or the reason it was put together that way, was to be flexible and implementable. So if we have varying amounts of resources, meaning funding to apply to it, we can go as quickly or as slowly as we want. But we also don't lose our ultimate vision of what we want to see in our particular street. And that's kind of the concept for the bike plan. The last thing I want to say is the bike plan is starting with the network, because that's the part that if we get that into our comp plan and into our CFP, we can start applying for grants and we can start building things. We do need to continue to work on it to address things like education, enforcement, wayfinding. I think somebody said bike storage at one of the planning commission meetings. But it is a good start to understand the capital investments that we need to make to get development and large transportation projects installing the right facility as soon as possible, and helps us start finding funds as well. Okay, so I did hit the slide correct. So that's the brief I have for you. And again, this is the start of this public outreach point. We're hoping to talk to stakeholders. There's a website available. There will be a virtual meeting. And again, I would like you to, hopefully, Nathan, to have a conversation with Planning Commission to figure out the best way, if there want to be ongoing conversation between Planning Commission members and staff about the bike plan as they read it and review it and have questions on it.
Thank you for that presentation, Mr. Murakawa. So commissioners, questions, comments? Gotta believe there are some. Scrolling up and down. That's, oh, Commissioner Robson.
I'm going to stop sharing. Sorry.
Yes, that'll help. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was just looking at the plan online, and I was wondering if you could tell me what the neighborhood green.
Oops, we lost you. You muted.
I was wondering if you could tell us what the neighborhood greenway is, or what looks like Sharrows. Maybe you covered that and I just missed it.
No, I didn't cover it specifically, so those are good questions. So greenways are making use of a street grid system as an example. They use it quite a bit in Seattle, where you have multiple streets, some of which are heavily loaded with cars and usage, and some that are paralleling it that are much narrower and they go through neighborhoods. What they typically do is they may do some speed control things like putting speed bumps. They also put crossings when it has to cross arterials, and they designate it as a neighborhood greenway, and that's a good place to walk and bike and parallel that main route to get to your destination. We don't have too many of those here because we have, except in the downtown area, we don't really have a great grid system, but in the downtown area, I think at least in Plan B, we want to use part of the neighborhood because that is the easiest, least expensive way to get around. And if we can use it as a parallel route, it kind of makes sense before we have an opportunity to spend money on an arterial route and kind of punch through, so to speak. Sharrows are a little different in the sense is just a way to notify people that bikes are sharing the road, and they really aren't appropriate unless the conditions there are correct. You don't want a lot of cars, a lot of speed. You want to have some room. I got to say, over the years, I've seen them used much, much differently than they originally were. So that is another area where input would be appreciated because it's one of those things. Some people like it, some people don't. Some people have misconceptions of what it actually means. But it essentially means you're sharing the road with the car.
Commissioner Dodd.
Sorry to do another question. But I guess Sharrows have kind of puzzled me first as mainly a driver. It's like, well, yeah, there are bikes randomly. And then as a bicyclist, I kind of want people to watch for me all the time, not just on roads with Sharrows. It's kind of weird. So I guess, are there studies that show that they do something and maybe it just hasn't occurred to me, or I'm curious about them.
I'm sure there's studies out there. I would have to defer to Sherman, and I can take down the question and we can get back to you definitely on that.
Thank you.
Like I said, I've seen them used very differently from when they've come out before. And I think you're not alone. Some drivers are not. The bicyclists pretty much understand what they're supposed to mean, but I think a lot of the drivers may not. And sometimes that does not give comfort to the bicyclists. Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner Gustafson.
Thank you. It's Sarah Gustafson here. Really exciting to talk about the bike plan. Thank you, Mr. Morikawa, for taking the wheels of this presentation. It was really helpful to see the cost estimates in Appendix D of the bike plan. I have a couple of items that I'm wondering, are these going to be costed out separately, and how do these fit in? And the items that I'm thinking about, I think there are 5 of them, is wayfinding and storage, as you mentioned. Curb cuts, sometimes those are, I think, the most useful things to make a path accessible or usable. Smoothing out the routes. So those are for physical additions. And then, is there any funding allocated for community education? I would love to have a urban biking course offered by Bothell, or if you're in a car, how to deal with bikers course offered by Bothell. So those are the 5 things I'd like to see considered in the cost.
Let me just give you a quick response, and then those are great things. So the cost estimates you see in there, the appendix, are essentially Part B only. As I told you, if we were to try to do, I'm going to use 228th Street as an example again. 228th Street, there's some sections that are 5 lanes, some sections that are 1 lane in each direction, some sections that are 3 lanes. If we were to try to put our protected bike lane in there as one project, it would likely cost tens of millions of dollars. Just the gaps that we're trying to fill on a portion of that roadway in Part B, we took it out, Part B, it's a standalone project. We think we can get a grant maybe for it, is about $8 million. So that's the kind of cost if we were to do Part A, our final vision for the whole road, and do it as one project within a few years. That's the 100 million plus that we would have to spend to get our complete vision, okay? We're not losing the vision. We're gonna hold that vision. That's gonna be our standards. That's the standards that frontage work will have to meet, big road projects will have to meet. Part B, those are the costs that we're gonna try to fund in the bike program on an annual basis, as an example. And we gave an example on, I think we said something like $500,000 a year, which is just a starting point. It's just a discussion point. This is the amount of money that would need to be spent to fill in gaps, to get connectivity as quickly as possible. And in itself, it is not a small sum. I think the first tier, I think there's in 3 tiers. The first tier has almost a dozen projects, and it would take us, I can't remember, I think it says in there, I forget what it says, 15 years or something like that, just to do the Part B top tier projects, okay? Right now, that 500,000, we haven't put in wayfinding, storage, curb cuts, smoothing out routes. Commissioner Gustafson, I count as maintenance, which is a big issue, and education. So what I'm saying is we need to address these things and come up with a plan on how we're going to maintain this stuff, what kind of education programs we want, what kind of signs we need to do. We can't just put signs. We typically have to figure out and make it make sense. However, during this budget cycle, if it is of an interest, then some of the input we would like to hear is, are those important enough that part of your funding that you have available, let's just say you spend $500,000 a year. Let's just say of the $500,000, you get half of that from grants. Do you want to assign a certain portion of that funding available toward education, maintenance, wayfinding? So you could say, well, let's put 10% toward maintenance, let's put 5% toward education, and let's put 5% toward wayfinding. And the rest of it, whatever's left, we're going to use as match money to try to get grants to do Part A projects. That's certainly something we can do. We don't quite have all the details filled in on a wayfinding program. That's something we would have to do. And that's the work, the dynamic work we continue to have to do on the bike plan.
Thank you. Other commissioners? Commissioner Gustafson.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak before I follow up on that?
Please follow up.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Morikawa, for putting it under two umbrellas of maintenance and education. I really appreciate that because it helps focus us. I would say that maintenance is so important, even perhaps more so than building protected bike lanes, even though I really want those. So maybe we should have a debate here to try to figure out what portion of the budget do we want to devote to route smoothing and so forth. Is 10% a good rule of thumb? What do other cities do? How might we get to a good number to suggest?
Yeah, and if you're asking me, that's a great question. And the way I would approach it is I would start with something because typically because our bike plan is so old, most of our bike facilities are on street, which the street crew takes care of because it's in the right of way. So the ones we're really talking about with a lot of the routes are oftentimes the shared use paths like North Creek Trail. Burke Gilman is not even ours. That's King County. Sammamish River is King County. We have one along 240th. That's really actually the business parks, and they're supposed to maintain it. And we're trying to get them to maintain it. Difficult. But what I would say is let's allocate some funds if it's important enough as a start so that it's not zero. And part of the conversation that takes time for us is these are the kinds of things we have to talk to people about. So we would talk to our crews who actually do the work, and we would do cost estimates to see how many route smoothing and cutting they can do and how much does it cost. And then we can fine tune it. But again, what I would like to hear is what are the most important pots and how do you want to divide up the money? Because unfortunately, the resources won't be unlimited. There will be short, so we will have to prioritize. But if it's important enough to put a certain percentage aside, then perhaps we start there. And in a couple of years, if it's not enough, we can add more. If it's too much, we can bring it back. That's probably the easiest way to do that. Yeah.
Thank you. I have two comments I'd make. First, I was pleased to hear you refer to the school district. I walk by Canyon Park Middle School frequently. And one of the things that disappoints me a little bit is how few bikes I see in the rack, often none. So I think it'd be great if we can get kids on bikes more. I know the city has put a significant effort into making the walking routes safe with crossings and designations. And if we could just expand that education to biking, I think that'd be a great thing. Second point, maintenance. Yeah, real important. And one of the unfortunate things I've observed is the more you separate the lanes from the traffic, the more challenging the maintenance becomes. There's a lane on 19th going down towards 228 that has a curb separation, and I ride it fairly frequently, a little more before I had some issues, but branches in there are quite frequent, and you sweep the street, But as far as cleaning that lane, it's real challenging. So just like to kind of keep that in mind with those separated lanes, be sure that we can maintain them or else they lose their utility. So those are my 2 comments. Commissioner Curd.
Thanks. And thanks, Mr. Morikawa, for the presentation. It's no secret that I've been critical of the process from this bike plan. And so I'm encouraged that the city is taking steps to bring it up again and resurrect the process. Couple things I have on my list to discuss. So just because maintenance was just brought up, I want to throw my 2 cents in, which is that maintenance is a value statement. So if it's truly important for us to maintain high quality spaces and spaces that are free of debris and that are stormwater safe, then we will do that. And there are cities that purchase sweepers for their bike lanes. That's not something that we should just shy away from just because it's an extra expense. It's something that we need to invest in and have as an ongoing maintenance if we really care about keeping people on bikes safe. The other thing about cost buckets, my bike route just changed in the city, and now I bike on over by Commissioner Robson's house, over on the North Creek Trail, right near UW Bothell. And whoa, there are some really big routes there. But I will say that I would rather ride on a route-ridden path than on 522, right? So it's kind of a different value judgment for putting money in buckets when you're looking at bike facilities rather than cars. So when we would think about maybe car facilities, we'd think about access to parking and, what does the streetscape look like, or proximity to places. With a bike, you're really thinking about not dying. And so right of way is probably the highest and best use of any public funds for bike infrastructure, in my opinion. Bike infrastructure takes up some space, right? And so we have to think about where's that space coming from. And if you've been looking for real estate in the city, and Mr. Morikawa, I'm sure you're aware, each square inch of our city is appreciating at almost disgusting rates. And so getting the right of way secured as quickly as possible is critical if we're looking at expanding facilities. But something else to consider, which might be more politically and economically feasible, would be reallocating some of the space that we already have. Our right of way in the city of Bothell is traditionally suburban, and that comes with a huge cross section through the street. Sometimes like 40 or 60 feet, which is a lot of pavement. That doesn't all have to be for cars. And if you drive down some of the roads that we have, some pretty extensive turn lanes that, could be minimized for some additional space for buffering and protected bike lanes. Even in some areas, it's still building out the network. So reallocation of street space, I think, could be one path forward to reduce some of the costs associated with expensive right-of-way in our city. The other thing, reading through the draft plan, so glad that was issued this week. Thanks for getting on that. I know that's, even at my work, getting out a big project like that, it's pretty hectic. So thank you. I wanted to reiterate that the bike plan talks a lot about the travel space, right? And so along roads, that's the fun part to talk about. Is it going to be buffered? Is it going to be protected? Is it going to be paint? Is it going to be physical space? But when you look at the crash data, most of the crashes happen at intersections. And so we cannot neglect intersection treatments. And there are some great suggestions. I love the bike box idea that's detailed in that draft plan. Those are great, they work. Some other ideas that we could maybe think outside the box a little bit and think about pedestrian leading in, what is it called? intervals, pedestrian leading intervals at the bag buttons on the sides of or on the corners of the streets for pedestrians. If they have extra time to walk before cars start turning at them, bikes might also be able to have additional time before the light signals change. And so coming up with other ideas for intersection treatments could be another great improvement to the plan as you have it now. And so I encourage you to think big on those intersections, especially because that's where a lot of the crash data show that we have problems. And that's just traditionally been a terrible place to bike anyway. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is the city of Bothell has a DEI consultant on the payroll. And so we need to utilize that resource. And so having the DEI consultant take a look at the bike plan with a critical lens and making sure that that we're using that resource would be great. And I look forward to giving a lot of feedback and looking as the plan evolves. So thanks for including us in the discussions.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
Excuse me. Thank you. Thanks to Mr. Murakawa. It was great, as others have said, finally get the update. And I look forward to participating in the helping the focus group and so forth. I don't have much to add. I would echo everything everybody said so far, and in particular Commissioner Curd's comments. For me, and I do cycle quite a bit. I used to commute a lot. I do it more for recreation now, but I do use it to get around as well. And have for over 30 years now because I'm getting old. But bottom line is, and then I'll say this in my comments later, I would think that the thing that's going to get people on bikes is protecting them from vehicles. I think about my kids going out, my wife, my mom, people who don't, ride in traffic like I have been comfortable doing. And I'm not even super comfortable doing it, but, I'm more used to it. I would probably say if it's a prioritizing thing, I think it'd be better to have one or two really key point A to point B, like downtown to Canyon Park and east to west routes, whatever, that were almost completely protected and had safer intersections and leading intervals and crosswalks and so forth, and like put the resources into a couple of those before we sort of scatter a little bit everywhere like fairy dust. So just that approach, like just, like it seems super critical to have a really safe, reliable route between downtown and Canyon Park. And I know we're working on that, particularly with the re-engineering of 527. So, and I would just think about it that way, kind of, because it is extremely expensive. I get that totally. I understand. And adding on to that, I read a lot of stuff by Jeff Speck, who is a urban planner of some note, who's national expert. He's worked with cities all over North America and now all over the world, implementing ideas for cities. Like he started Oklahoma City years ago, helping them design their entire city, and he's done it in dozens since then. And he speaks all over the country and has written a lot of books. But anyway, one of the things he said when I was at the Congress for New Urbanism a month or so ago was, he said, if for the bang for the buck, restripe everything. I know that's expensive too. It's not just a cheap thing. But like Commissioner Curd said, we have these huge right-of-ways. Every time I walk around, I'm thinking, wow, we have this so much road. We often have a poor allocation of space because we're thinking, we laid them out in the 70s and 80s and the 90s, whatever. And so thinking about it that way. And so I couldn't help but think of Jeff Speck there, because he said you can get so much bang for your buck by just reallocating that right-of-way and restriping it one at a time. And then maybe you restripe it. And this is eventually going to be a protected bike lane, but we can't afford bollards yet. But we're going to lay it out so that when we can just put them in 5 years or something like that. So I always have that echo through my head that he said, get the paint going, reuse the space. And we're seeing that. Like I was up in Vancouver and Victoria during spring break a couple weeks ago. They've done a lot of that. And the city of Seattle's done that. So, and Tool's probably been a big part of that as well, because they do a lot of that work. So those were just a couple things that came to mind. I don't have a whole lot to add besides that, but I'll be thinking about that when I do the focus group questions. I appreciate the work very much. I'm just really excited to see this and so glad the city is starting to prioritize it. Thank you.
Other commissioners? Commissioner Gustafson.
Hi, Sarah Gustafson here. I'm really glad that we're having a debate, and I see there's a bit of tension between creating the paths that will attract people, that east-west and north-south spine, and keeping people there once they've joined. And I'm not hearing a lot of support for the maintenance, which I feel is important to keep people on the paths once they've joined. And I'm wondering, since I see the value in both, can we create a prioritized maintenance schedule? It might not be as important to clear the branches and the bumps from North Creek Trail if you can just ride around them, but it is crucial to clear the branches and the bumps from an unprotected bike lane, because then you just have to go around the bumps into traffic, and none of the cars expect you to be there because they're like, oh, you have a bike lane, why are you going to traffic? Well, there's a big bump there and I can't get the cargo bike over it with the kids in the back seat. So I think it's important to maybe look at the last mile, or the last couple of
Monty's friends are here. They're outside the door.
the last couple of inlets that would take people to those spine routes, and see what can be done to at least prioritize maintenance on those paths. So thank you.
Other commissioner comments? So I would kind of take off from something Commissioner Kurtz said about safety and not wanting to, did you say not wanting to die? Or I think you might have gone there. Anyone who's done a lot of riding in urban environment knows one of the more nerve-wracking things is riding next to parked cars, particularly when there's a driver sitting there, because the door. So I'd like you to be very conscious of the intersection of parking and bike lanes too. And in fact, I often see people parking in bike lanes because what the heck, is space on the side of the road and why not use it? So making again that parking issue is one that is a really significant safety issue that people may not think about until they've had the bad incident, and that door swings open and you either hit it or swing out in traffic. So separating parking from bike lanes too, I think, is something to really keep in mind. Mr. Westerbeck, do you have something, or just a residual hand?
Nope, forgot to take my hand down. Apologies.
Not a problem. Other commissioner comments? Seeing none, I think you can tell there's considerable interest on the commission in bicycling. A number of us have done a fair amount of it. Thank you for bringing this to us. We look forward to hearing again, and I think you'll have many of us on the 25th participating in that. Are you calling it an open house, or?
It is a virtual open house, but again, I think,
house.
Nathan, I want to ask the question because this is such a interesting, passionate topic for everyone. Is there a communication path if commissioners want to feed input after they look at a detailed look at the plan? And I want to reiterate again, part of the plan is to try to identify and quantify things. So right now there's a grid that's proposed in the ultimate vision. So take a look at that. If that's your vision in the long term, that's great. If it's not, you would put more resources here, or doesn't feel safe enough there. That's great. And then the part B part, which is another map, is how do we get connectivity as quickly as possible? Because we're trying to be somewhat practical. We don't think we're going to get to the ultimate vision soon. So we want to get as much connectivity as possible. We also want to be smart about it. So if we fill in gaps, we don't want to fill in temporary gaps. We want to fill in permanent gaps in the vision of the ultimate facility that's going to be there. So if those don't look right either, or there's more important things, like Commissioner Westerbeck said, well, maybe you should focus on the north-south and this particular east-west first, and then fill in the pieces as you can go. That is the kind of thing that we need to hear, because that is how you kind of prioritize things. And then we can cost it, and then we can figure out a way to get it done, because that's the highest priority. It will be an interesting discussion, because even if we talk about the old 527, when we're done with this Bothell project, there'll be a wonderful facility all the way up to Safeway. And then we're back to a 5-foot on the street bike lane. So now, do we as city stewards want to spend the money to tear out a curb, put it back again with the planter and the protected bike lane behind it with the sidewalk, which we could. And interestingly enough, it won't take any more right away. It's exactly the same width, which is the beauty of that. But it would be a protected bike lane. So even things like that, is that more important than somewhere else? It's kind of like the sidewalk program. Is that more important than no facility somewhere else? Because it's such a high visibility and high use location. So that's the kind of struggles that we're going to have. And those are the things we want to hear about. So that's a great conversation. And the maintenance part, Commissioner Curd, is wonderful to hear. We had a discussion the other day with operations about type of vehicles that can handle certain things, which is opportunity. But there are some real maintenance challenges out there that may influence how we make certain decisions on the type of facilities we put in, because maintenance does cost as well. And certain facilities are more expensive or are higher risk, regardless of what we think about them. So that also fits into the equation. So it'll be an interesting discussion. And I think it would be appreciated if you don't wait till we get to you. You don't wait to the virtual open house. As you have those things, and as you get into detail and you're familiar with how the plan is put together, please send us information and questions and input. We can certainly work through them, and that'll give us more time to work through them as well. I appreciate your time tonight.
Commissioner Dodd, closing comment?
Yeah, I guess just to be clear, should we email those to Sherman directly? Is that the best way to do that?
I'm asking Nathan, because my suspicion is Nathan would want it to go through him. It's because it's a commissioner question, and we want to make sure we get your question through Nathan. And then when we get if it's a question and a response, we'd want all of you to have that same information.
Yeah, just to weigh in, I think that's a good approach. The only thing we would need to worry about is I would ask commissioners to email us separately, lest we violate the open meetings laws. So we've talked about that at length before, and you're all aware of that. And I think we can sort of filter feedback and maybe categorize it and get it to Sherman. Maybe there's questions that don't require a discussion in this forum that we can handle ahead of time, and then maybe there are some that do require some consensus building, and so we can help prepare those and put them into a memo. And I just wanted to tack on, and Steve, you touched on this earlier. There's a process, and this is for our newer commissioners. This is technically going to be a amendment to the comprehensive plan transportation element. And so we've identified that as a 2022 comprehensive plan amendment. We're allowed to amend our comp plan once a year, every year. And so the approach we're taking is to do this now ahead of the periodic update, so that we can have everything in place and kind of give the bike plan more teeth. What we're discussing right now is the best way to do that. So you'll have a few more study sessions, or however long it takes to weigh in and get your input in the plan. You're not really officially voting to approve the plan. It's more of the comprehensive plan amendment. And so on one end of the spectrum, we could just sort of adopt it by reference. And on the other end, we could sort of try to like insert Part A and Part B strategically into the current transportation plan and some of the sub-area plans that mention bike facilities. So we're looking at that right now, and we'll have it have a good, what we think will be a good approach for you forthcoming, and we'll go from there. And then this is, the bike plan is big. Y'all are obviously passionate about it, and it warrants its own discussion. So Dave and I have had this conversation whether we want to bring, because there are other comp plan amendments on our docket this year with private amendment requests and maybe one or two others. I can't recall right now, but instead of packaging them all together, we would bring this through separately. You would make an official recommendation to City Council for how to amend the comp plan for the bike plan, and then they'll adopt later. So that's sort of the process. But yeah, please do begin to email me, and we'll do our best to filter that to Public Works and get your questions to them in a timely manner ahead of the open house.
All right, thank you. Well, you've given us some homework, and I believe the commissioners will take it seriously. So we look forward to discussing this some more. It sounds as if you will have a quorum at that May 25th meeting. So I'm trusting the staff to do whatever needs to be done as far as notice and open public meetings and all that.
Yeah, there should be a public hearing, a public notice that already went out, but I'll double check to make sure that we're covered.
Okay, good. All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Morikawa. We, again, are very interested in this. So we look forward to hearing from you and/or Sherman some more on this and getting our feedback incorporated as the plan moves forward. So thanks and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
All right. Our next item of new business is the King County countywide planning policies. And is that you, Senior Planner Lamb?
That is me. And just looking at the clock here, I think what I'll do is I'll plan to go through this pretty quickly. So I'm going to share my screen here.
So then for reference, perhaps we'll try to go through this and then take a brief break for the commissioners and then come back for the remainder of the discussion. That'll put us probably close to an hour and a half by the time we get through here.
Okay. So this presentation was given to council a couple months ago. And actually, I was gonna, before I dive into my items, I was gonna say that it is nice to see you all again because it's been a few months. So we'll get through this as quickly as we can. I think because we did talk about this late last year, the King County CPPs. And then we'll move on to the TDR stuff after our break. So the King County countywide planning policies are going to be an integral part of the periodic update coming up. The process to update the CPPs for King County, and remember for our newer commissioners, we have two sets of CPPs, both Snohomish County and King County, that we have to manage. This process took place over the last couple years, part of which some of our staff sat in on some of the regional staff committees working as an interjurisdictional team. And so we'll do a high level overview of them right now, but just keep in mind that we're going to be going over the policies themselves probably quite a bit once we get closer to the actual update of our comp plan. So what are CPPs? Just some background information to get us all up to speed. There are written policy statements used for establishing a framework for our comp plans. Okay, so they also reflect state, regional, and local priorities based on the Growth Management Act. and then the Puget Sound Regional Council multi-county planning policies, as well as the PSRC regional growth strategy, which can be found in this Vision 2050 document. So they're all consistent, and we're supposed to be consistent with these CPPs as well. Okay, so early last month, our council gave an affirmative vote to transmit our vote to the King County clerk, and we were part of the ratification of the CPPs requires 30% of city and county governments representing 70% of the King County population to ratify the CPPs, and we had an affirmative vote. And so these have officially been ratified, and so they are in effect. And these are just some more context and parameters for how the CPPs were updated. The last major update to them was in 2012, so it's been quite a while, but the idea is to align with our periodic comp plan updates. It pulls from regional policy legislative changes, and it aims to give us actionable direction for our comprehensive plans. What's new this time around is the CPP Center Social Equity and Health. And then also we have new growth targets replacing our 2035 growth targets. I believe we spoke about that about maybe summertime last year. Here's just a quick look at where we ended up for our growth targets for King County. Let's just focus on the red and green numbers. Again, this is the King County side. We have separate growth targets for Snohomish County. This is our share of the region's growth out to 2044 that we need to accommodate. And the growth targets are preceded by the buildable lands capacity report. And that informs us of how much capacity we have to accommodate growth. And if you look at this first column here in the green for housing units, we did find that we have sufficient capacity and then some to accommodate our share of growth in the region to 2044. Okay, and for jobs, we just barely are missing the mark. But that is a very small number, 165 jobs. Keep in mind, the horizon is 20 years from now. So we have 20 years to create policy and development regulations, land use decisions that would bolster our capacity or create capacity to meet those targets. So all in all, we're in pretty good shape. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that the new CPPs integrate equity and social health, social equity and health, and the concepts cut across all of the chapters in the CPPs and use a pro-equity lens or treatment. They use the interjurisdictional team working on the policies, use the King County Equity Impact Review Tool and Social Justice Strategic Plan for a framework. The analysis that they did, the topics focused on transportation, land use, public service provision, environment, housing, and economic policy. We'll get into how these have been kind of peppered into the policies in the next couple slides. And then they do mention that centers and high capacity growth should be focused into places that have or are planning for easy transit access to well-paying jobs, quality education, housing choices, a mix of land use and a healthy environment. So additionally, the CPPs contain a housing chapter, and this was revamped since the last time the CPPs were administered. And so this time the state and region are requiring that the counties accommodate their share, much like the growth targets of the affordable housing needs. And so we're going to have mandatory targets, if you will, of the different affordability and income brackets that we have to provide affordable housing for. And on top of that, they have built in monitoring and accountability policies where the county and region can come and look at whether we are meeting the mark and accommodating our share of affordable housing that's needed in the region. You can go look at the King County Housing Dashboard right now. This is one of the infographics that's pulled from there. So at any point in time, someone can go look and see, okay, is Bothell meeting the mark? And so that's quite a bit different than their last housing chapter policies. For the environment chapter, new updates will work to ensure that neighborhoods in King County have access to clean air, land, water, and acknowledge that access to a healthy environment hasn't been equitably distributed. In the development patterns chapter, this map should be familiar to some of you. There's a new centers designation framework whereby they've taken the categories of regional growth centers and expanded them. We did apply to be have our downtown designated as a countywide growth center, and that has some requirements that we'll be looking at as part of our periodic update. But we are a candidate for that, so we've kind of jumped through the first hoop with the county so far. Mostly the development chapter now discusses mitigating the potential physical, economic, and cultural displacement of residences and businesses in those growth centers and high capacity transit station areas. In the economy chapter, it looks to implement the regional economic strategy that was recently adopted, and most of the policies talk about advancing the business interest of BIPOC communities, immigrant and refugee, and other marginalized communities. For the transportation, and this is our last slide here, for the transportation and public facilities chapter, it looks at and updated the policies to create an equitable transportation system focused on updated policies related to transit use, active transportation, alternative fuels, and alternatives to single occupancy vehicle travel. And they also center equity in public service provision across King County. So I can take questions. Like I mentioned, these are in full effect, and the document itself is pretty lengthy. I think the approach that we'll take for the periodic update is sorting they have the policy sorted by chapter, but we'll need to figure out the best way to couple them with and combine them with the Snohomish County policies and sort those out, and so that we can integrate them into the framework for our comp plan as we update it. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. I can take questions, and if I need to pull the presentation back up, I can. Just let me know. Thank you.
Commissioner Anders?
Yes, this is Tony Anders here. This is probably familiar to other council members, but since I'm new, it's sort of all new to me. You mentioned that we had started the process to have the downtown named as a countywide growth center. Is there a benefit to the city in having that designation for the downtown space?
Yeah, excellent question. I kind of I blew by that. So yeah, you're exactly right. There's the biggest benefit is that we become more competitive for regional transportation funding at the state level and regional level. And so once the other side of the coin, though, is once we get that designation, if we're able to meet the requirements through our analysis, you have to maintain a certain density of activity units, and you're gonna see a little bit about that in the transfer of development rights presentation. But we have to maintain a certain density of jobs and housing units in downtown to keep that designation, and that's something that is very important for Public Works. If Steve was still on here, I'd have him talk about the importance of these centers designations, because they really do help us leverage our proposals for and requests for funds for projects in the city. So,
Thank you.
sure.
Other commissioners? Commissioner Gustafson?
Hi, Sarah Gustafson here. Thank you, Senior Planner Lamb, for helping us see some of the most important parts here. How does the countywide planning monitor their goals around displacement, or really avoiding displacement and supporting businesses from immigrant and refugee communities? Do they put down requirements for the city for capturing data or retaining certain types of businesses?
Yeah, that's you know what, I think we need to look in that more, because we want to make sure that we're going to be on the hook for these policies. The what I can say right now is, I don't have these policies in front of me right now, but they talk about making sure that we don't have, or that we have anti-displacement policies, particularly in the housing chapter. And we're supposed to be getting, actually next month here, some guidance from the state as well as PSRC for working with the counties on how to craft those policies. In fact, right now I'm helping us staff a interjurisdictional group on the Snohomish County side that also is requiring us to have anti-displacement policies. And so we're sort of waiting for some guidance for data and to create those policies. And I would think, the language in those policies would be how we meet the requirements of the King County requirements. And I think once that data is available at the state level, I'd imagine, more pointed to your question, sorry, I kind of digressed there, but I'd imagine they'll be using that data to monitor us and to check on us, because they will be keeping that dashboard, housing dashboard, updated regularly. So they'll have some way to monitor us. But I'll make a note, because that would be helpful for us to know how we can make sure we stay on top of that as we move forward. So.
Thank you.
Commissioner Westerbeck?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Senior Planner Lamb. This is Carrie Westerbeck. This is fascinating. I really appreciate the update. I hear about these things. I don't always go jump into them and study them. So really appreciate you giving us the high points, and the updated goals and plans are encouraging to see. I'm curious, Bothell, you guys have the extra burden of having the city with 2 counties, right? I imagine that creates some extra work for you guys, and also, but to that end, are there work groups between the 2 counties where they try and coordinate? I mean, obviously, we're probably the only ones who have to deal with that, but do they, because they're next to each other, do Snohomish and King, try to align in any way, or again, coordinate? I'm just curious about that. I imagine they probably have some similar goals, but how does that work for you guys and for the counties? We lose Nathan?
He appears to be frozen.
Frozen.
Nathan?
We don't want a frozen Nathan.
Oh. And now he disappeared.
Well, my question wasn't that important, but I'm sure we'll get him back. He still has
Yeah,
another presentation.
Did somebody else get host privileges? Oh, okay.
yeah, he's coming back. It seemed to have jumped to BCTV and now we'll give him a moment. There you are, Nathan. Can you hear us? Oh, you moved a little bit and then you froze again. Well, this is challenging since he's
You
in
wanna-
charge. In charge of the video.
Should we take a break or something? And
Yeah, that's what I'm puzzling, but I'm assuming BCTV is monitoring this. I'm going to suggest that we do take a 10-minute break. I've got 7:23 on my screen here, and I see Nathan jumped off again. So let's come back at 7:33. Hopefully we'll resolve the video issues here and be able to resume the meeting. So for anyone watching at home or elsewhere, apologize for the challenges here, but we will be back. So see you all in 10.
Don't forget to mute when you go on break, guys, since the TV might not take a break.
prepare to restart. All right, we are reconvening the May 4th meeting of the Bothell Planning Commission. We had a few technical difficulties just before the break, but we are all here and online, and internet willing, we will continue the meeting. So we were having a presentation on the King County countywide planning policies from Senior Planner Lamb. He had finished his presentation and we had moved into some questions. So commissioners. Not seeing any indications. I've got one. Senior Planner Lamb, you indicated the policies, the county policies will become effective when adopted by 30% of the cities representing 70% of the population. And I believe there are 39 cities in King County from my prior life. That means you need probably 12. And quite frankly, there are probably 2 cities that can carry the population. Do you know how the policies are doing as far as the adoption at the county level?
They have actually been ratified. I did go over that pretty fast. It was the 6th of last, so just about this time last month, the King County Council did ratify them and did adopt them. So, and that was after, once they release them to jurisdictions, it starts the clock on a 90-day ratification process. And if jurisdictions don't weigh in by the time that expires, they are assumed to have an affirmative vote. And so this time around, we had all of as many jurisdictions as we needed to ratify. So, yep.
Okay, so good to know. So they are the governing policies at this point.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Other commissioner comments or questions regarding the countywide planning policies? Commissioner Curd.
Thanks. My quick question was, when do you anticipate Snohomish County's countywide planning policies to be issued?
Those actually, I probably should have mentioned that too. Those are in full effect too. They adopted, I think they were ahead of King County. And what happened is they were still working on the growth targets. And so it was like an amendment to the CPPs, but theirs are adopted too. They sort of take a different approach with theirs. They have, they visualize it as a pyramid, and they have guiding principles and frameworks, and it distills all the way down into the policy. So we can give a briefing on those two. That would probably be helpful, especially ahead of the periodic update. But yeah, those are in effect too for that county as well.
Well, thank you.
Muted. Commissioner Anders.
I'm sorry, I don't have a question. I just wanted to let everyone know I am online. I'm having some trouble with my video. It keeps going in and out. I think it's my cord. I'm working on it. But if I go out, I'm still here. I'm trying to figure out how to come in and stay in.
Thank you. Boy, we're looking forward to in-person meetings. All right. Any other questions or comments relating to the planning policies? Seeing none, let's close the new business portion of the agenda and move on to the study session regarding Canyon Park Transfer of Development Rights Program. And Senior Planner Lamb, it's you again, I believe.
That's me. Let's see. And I'm actually gonna do the same and cut my camera while I give the presentation, just in case I don't want to get booted again like that. And I did say I'll follow up with Commissioner Westerbeck offline to get him an answer to his question. So pull this up for you all, put it in presentation mode, and we should be in business. So we're bringing transfer of development rights back to you after having been, when was that? That must have been late last year. We were in phase 1 and we brought this to you. We had been working with Burt Consulting, and we still are. We're in the later half of phase 2 and hoping to land the plane here within the next couple of months. But at long last, we have some draft code for your review. And so, yeah, let's get into that right now. Hopefully you all have the your memo in front of you. I would like to take the same approach to the last time we did, if you'll recall, the housekeeping code amendments. I've got the code up on slides here, but I think we can get around going through it line by line because you've already had a chance to review it. And I'll break this presentation up more than we did the last time around because you all were very patient as when you sat there, and we took a while to get through that last presentation. But it had a lot of good background information, and I'll try to synthesize that now for our new commissioner. We have some policy in our Canyon Park sub-area plan that calls for creating an activity unit transfer development rights program, and it would be for essential public facilities. Essential public facilities are land uses that are typically difficult to cite, such as airports, state education, correctional institutions, solid waste, substance abuse, mental health, and group homes. And in this case, a regional transit authority facility. So Sound Transit has proposed locating their bus-based North Maintenance bus facility in Canyon Park as part of their system expansion for BRT in the next couple of years coming online. And so that's sort of the genesis of this program. The goal of the transfer of development rights, or as we had been calling it, activity unit transfer program, is to create more opportunities for affordable housing and transportation oriented development. And I'll just quickly say activity units, again, are a measure of total activity that combines jobs and population. So because we have a Canyon Park Regional Growth Center designation already, we have density and number of jobs and households that we need to maintain. And so this gets at any, like, I don't want to say loopholes, but anywhere where there's a potential to undermine our established development regulations for Canyon Park, which will be explained on this slide. So we have established in Canyon Park minimum development intensities, and hopefully you can see my cursor on this first row here. For each zone, there's a minimum FAR that developments have to meet. And some essential public facilities just don't need to build up to that intensity. And so as a result, we don't capture as many of the jobs or households that we could have with a development, private development that's providing a bigger building with more jobs and households. And that was the premises of establishing these minimum densities and intensities so that we could meet our PSRC activity unit targets. So that's sort of the genesis of this, and this figure on the right just explains FAR. If you have a 10,000 square foot lot and you have a FAR of 0.5, as the picture shows, whoops, we'll go back there. You can build on half a lot, but there's other ways to realize that FAR through your gross floor area by building higher. And so that's FAR explained in this table. We did establish maximum base FAR for each zone, but the key here is this third column, maximum FAR with incentives. You can exceed that maximum base FAR with transfer of development rights or other incentives. Okay, so a little more background on the timeline. Phase 1 was the assessment and recommendations report that we brought to you. Is basically the meat of it was a pro forma analysis that told us whether or not this transfer of development rights would even be feasible in Canyon Park, and we found that it was. And we are now in phase 2, which is more of the code development and administrative process for staff when and if this is used in the future. Just real quickly, some of the findings from the phase 1 report. Certificates were we're pivoting from calling, you've probably noticed in your memo, we're pivoting from calling them credits, and we're going to the nomenclature of certificates, and we'll talk about why we did that later on. But we found that they are valuable with other incentives. If you'll recall this graph on the right, you sort of saw these lines sloping down into the right out of that optimal return for investors that would be required for them to pursue buying TDR certificates. And but we found with other incentives like reduced parking and more permissible height in wood frame construction, maybe impact fee reductions or waivers, that the optimal returns go up, creating an incentive. And then finally, it's a long-term play for Canyon Park. The pro forma analysis accounts for land values in the future, and also what developers could get for rents, not now, but in the future. They do need to be higher to make it feasible than what it currently is at right now. The recommendations from the report were for us to use a public ownership model, which we're sort of borrowing like King County. So a development comes in this case, Sound Transit Bus Base North, they would transfer their credits to us, and we would act like a bank and a broker. And there I said credits again, I meant certificates. And we would essentially be the broker for when another development would come in and want to use those. We said that receiving sites should be reserved for high and medium density zones in Canyon Park near transit stations, and that we would earmark any proceeds or any sale of the certificates for affordable housing projects in Canyon Park. Okay, so we've had a little bit of public engagement. We brought this to the Development Services Advisory Group last month. This is something that our Development Services Division holds pre-COVID, like on a quarterly basis, and not so often the last couple years, but it's a chance to get to talk to builders in the community, and we did have some folks there that can build at these have built at these larger scales, and they gave us some good insight when we pitched this to them. The most important things we heard back from them that we want to underscore is that TDR programs can be confusing, so they often kind of shy away from using them, and that the value of certificates seems like it's unfavorable usually, so they don't get those returns that they're looking for because the cost of the certificates is too high, and that they thought the program should be expanded to the private market one day, realizing that it's only for essential public facilities right now. We are going to be reaching out to the Canyon Park Business Centers Association soon here before we have a public hearing on the code so that they have a chance to weigh in. And Sound Transit is currently weighing in on the code right now too. So the idea for now was to bring this for the commissioners to get a taste of what's in the code, and everyone will have a chance to weigh in, and we'll bring it back for a public hearing buttoned up. So I'll stop there for now and ask if there's any questions before we continue.
So commissioners, questions? Clarification? Commissioner Gustafson.
Hi, Sarah Gustafson here. Thank you, Senior Planner Lamb, again for putting in some great images and telling the story here. I'm really interested in the people who said that the cost of certificates was too high. Did they let you know, were there any prices discussed, or was this just more of a general worry that it was going to be too high? Any information you can provide on that feedback they gave would be great.
Sure. Yeah, they didn't give a particular price, but they just noted that they could never make it pencil out, and because of the requirements of the program, it was just confusing, and they could never make it work for their projects. At one point, they mentioned that the prices seem to be like adjusted for like really big. I think in your memo we had mentioned their recall of South Lake Union, so that it's like the prices of the certificates are for big campus developments or an intense development market that could has so many resources that they, TDR is something that they can leverage easily with their financing. Whereas for smaller scale builders, it's not really, it doesn't pencil out for them. So that's something that we are going to work out for this scenario with Sound Transit in an interlocal agreement. And that even goes into some of the feedback I think you had last time around about, we want to be careful about the pricing and because we want to be able to get some proceeds to be able to channel into affordable housing. So our consultant, who I've reserved for the public hearing, can speak to that more technically than I can, but he's devised a way to make sure we do that. We'll set the price at a particular level, and then if they're not being used, they can be adjusted accordingly, and it won't have to be sort of this big bureaucratic thing between Sound Transit and the city. We'll build that into the interlocal agreement. So that's something we're looking at.
Other commissioners? Commissioner Westerbeck.
Thank you. Appreciate this, Senior Planner Lamb. I understand a little bit more each time. Something I wasn't aware of till you just presented was you said at the DSAG, which I'm actually part of, but I had to miss last time. First time we met in person in a couple of years, and I had to miss it. But that they hoped it would extend to the private market. I guess I wasn't aware. I knew Sound Transit, of course, is a public entity. I thought we were starting with public, but that they were going to be open to public and private. So maybe I need clarification there. But it sounds like they can be sold to private from public, but maybe you have to be public to sell them. Or did I have that completely wrong?
No, I think you're on the right track. I think last time we did mention that the trajectory is to open it up to the private market, but for now it would only be public. And so they'll transfer to us, and then we can transfer to a private development. Yeah.
You
So
probably
that's
said that, and I probably didn't catch it. I appreciate the clarification. And then one other question. Yeah, it sounds like Commissioner Gustafson said they're finding it's not paying off. Is that why we're trying to get in front of it with sweetening it with parking reductions and things like that to kind of make it work out for them? Trying to pre-plan those. Is that the idea behind that, so that they do pencil out?
Yeah, exactly. They Andrew, our consultant, he can speak more to that pro forma model that he used next time around. But when he ran that model, what was always killing the project was the parking, of course. And
Yeah.
you all have talked about that at length. And so and that's in the code. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, that's the idea, to get out in
Okay,
front.
just want to see if I understood that. I appreciate that very much.
Other commissioners? So specific to Sound Transit, their project, they cannot use these the full available development capacity. So what they cannot use is being converted, or the proposal is to convert that into certificates that can be transferred to another project, correct?
Correct.
So would Sound Transit get any revenue for those certificates that they transfer? Or is it just, they can't use it, the city takes it, and then the city gets the revenue to use for affordable housing when a user of the certificates arrives?
Yeah, we've mulled over that, and we're finalizing how that would work. But so there's a couple of scenarios and ways to go about transferring the certificates. And one way is a no cost or reduced cost to qualified entities that would build affordable housing. And that is per the RCW. Don't ask me what the number is right now, but it's in the RCWs that a transit authority with surplus property like Sound Transit, it has to be first offered to qualified entities that would build affordable housing within a half mile of transit. The other way to go about getting proceeds is to sell those certificates for a private development at market value at a adjusted price, like we just talked about. And maybe, and you'll see in the code, we've built in some flexibility where perhaps through like a organization like Arch, we could channel the proceeds to help effectively subsidize affordable housing. I can't recall off the top of my head. I think Sound Transit is, I don't want to, I'll have to come back to you for that, how much they're going to keep. I don't know that we have that part worked out yet. So that's a good question. We haven't even drafted an interlocal agreement yet. We're working through the process of how this would work administratively, but we're getting there. So we have those scenarios in mind, but like who keeps what amount of the proceeds, I don't know, like percentage wise, but the idea is that the city would channel the revenue from the proceed money for affordable housing. So I'll have to follow up with you.
Okay, second question then related to the certificates. What if, hypothetical, a developer was proposing to build housing in one of the higher density areas in Canyon Park and said, in exchange for those certificates, they would add to their project more affordable housing? Would they have to pay for those certificates, or could that be the value that's received, getting an extra floor or two of affordable housing in that development?
I think let me see if I follow the question. And we've bent our brain on a lot of these hypotheticals, and we did give that some thought, like a clawback for especially if the the certificates weren't being utilized. Could Sound Transit claw them back and build an office building or residential units, which I understand they were opposed to when this discussion started years ago. But there is a provision that would let them do that. The tricky thing is to make the certificates usable as like a real estate instrument. They have to record an easement on the property, sort of like a conservation easement for traditional TDR. And so the other level of complexity is that, there's really no maximum FAR, because you can use incentives to build as much as you want. And so it becomes this, we're trying to make it not a tedious accounting exercise where, okay, they've extinguished some rights on the site, but if they want to come back and build more, they can build up to the maximum FAR, but we have to record that they gave away some of their rights already. But then there has to be a mechanism in the code for them to be able to come to use those credits if they want. So we'll get into that in the code. It's spelled out a little bit better than I'm explaining it. And certainly for the public hearing, we'll have all that ironed out. But we've thought about it at least and have attempted to put it in the code. So it's a good question.
Well, actually, I think my question is a little bit different. And I'm thinking about the receiving end of the certificates. So let's say there was a developer in the high density area in Canyon Park, and just to pull a number out of nowhere, they were able to build 3 stories residential. And they said, we'd like to build affordable housing into this if you let us go 4 stories. Would they have to pay for the certificates, revenue from which would then be used for affordable housing, or can the value the city receives be that affordable housing rather than the payment for the certificates? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I follow that a little bit better. So the question or the answer is, at least how we've discussed it up to this point, is it depends. So I mentioned earlier a no cost or reduced cost transfer. So if they want to build that 4th floor of affordable housing, Sound Transit has been amenable to transferring those certificates at no cost so that the city receives that benefit. And it has to be at that 80% affordability level that we talked about that towards the end of last year. I probably should have brought that up again in this presentation, but that's part of that RCW I mentioned. Now, where I think what we've heard from the commission is that y'all want deeper affordability than that 80% AMI level. And so where the proceeds would come in is, we would try to sell the credits to use the proceeds to subsidize projects that are proposing deeper affordability levels, like 60 as a starting point, or whatever we decide as a group that it should be. So I'll stop there because I think that's as far as we've gotten with it, but it's a good question that begs some more discussion. So,
well, I'll just kind of close this line of thought with a comment rather than a question. It seems to me one of our goals should be and is to have the process be as simple as possible. They talk about being difficult to understand, complicated. And if the goal, and I'll change that, our goal is to have these certificates give the benefit of additional affordable housing. If a developer can skip the whole loop of acquiring the credits, paying for the credits, having that revenue go to get the benefit, and just have the developer say, give me the credits, I'll give you the benefit. Now, of course, there will have to be bookkeeping to verify it, but it seems like that would be a simpler, more straightforward way to achieve the goal if there was a developer in the market that was amenable to that approach. And I might look to Commissioner Westerbeck with a little more experience in the market to see whether that makes sense, what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, as soon as you said it, I was like, that's brilliant. You just circumvent all the exchanges and say, it has how much value? Can we agree on a value? Okay, how about we give you this value in another way? It actually could almost be like a menu, maybe. I think it's brilliant, Kevin. Wish I would have thought of it.
You can have it. You can take it.
Nope. But anyway, no, I think it's really, it makes a lot of sense. Very streamlined. And some developers are, it's really common now to be willing to do some affordable housing. So it's kind of a easy thing to slot in too. So I think that's a good example.
Yeah. So I'd ask you to take a look at that, Senior Planner Lamb. Other commissioner questions or comments? So I'd make one more comment then on the, my initial reaction was, why limit it to public facilities? Let's open it up. The slight concern I would have would be if there's not a market for these certificates, or if the market's weak, to have on the one hand a developer not having that capacity and then have these credits build up. So I want to be sure that before we extend this too broadly, we achieve our goals. And I'm not sure how you do that, but that's just a concern I'd have.
Yeah, I'll just try to respond quickly. So that was something y'all brought up the first time around too, and the whole idea was to not, we didn't want to, we're on the same page in that we don't want to create a market whereby developers come in and say they have Bothell has this program, they have minimum development levels, but you can also build below them and I can just transfer my rights somewhere else because it's convenient. Those minimum thresholds were set for a reason. And so I think, that's the right idea, is that we would want to make sure we're on the right path to meeting our housing affordability goals near transit before opening it up to a new market, like you mentioned. So hopefully that helps a little bit. But I saw Commissioner Curd had his hand up.
Oh, Commissioner Curd.
Thanks. It was exactly that. My preference from before remains that I'd rather this not be opened up to the public or to the private developers. The whole purpose of TDR, I think, is that we're trying to make the best of a bad situation with Sound Transit. And so I don't want to extend that silver lining to every other lot in Canyon Park and then end up with the same thing that we have right now. So thanks.
Commissioner Dodd.
I would just echo what Commissioner Curd said. I really think it needs to be used pretty sparingly. And I don't know that I recall us reaching a consensus as a commission to open it up to private development.
Other commissioners? Yeah, I'm of two minds on it. I definitely have the concern that it could be used as a loophole from development, and possibly an approach might be if projects are paired, where this project doesn't have the rights, this one does, and the transfer would only be approved if there was a guaranteed use. But again, it's an idea that I have concerns about. Commissioner Westerbeck.
Thank you. Well, I am recalling, so I would actually, even though I was inquiring earlier, I would actually echo, Kevin, you have two minds, as well as Commissioner Dodd and Curd, that keeping it in the private sector is ideal and sort of a workaround. Because 2 or 3 years ago, I guess it was pre-pandemic because we were in person, I took Sound Transit to task because they were adamant that they could not add any program, more building space, other offices or homes, whatever, to their north base. And I really kind of bristled at that because I think they're just unwilling to. Mixed use, buildings are not uncommon at all, especially when it's valuable land like that in a growth center. And so I don't think they were very happy about those comments, but I think they were just unwilling. So I would agree that, you know, we shouldn't make this too easy, and they really could build it out if they wanted to. They talked about fumes and noise and stuff like that, but there was a way for, with a site of that size, for them to, with creative planning, you know, other countries do it all the time. I just think they're not trying very hard. So anyway, long-winded way of saying, yeah, we don't necessarily want all these sites to be built low density when they should be higher density, higher use on transit corridors and near services, schools and everything else. So my 2 cents. Thanks.
Well, to the transit use, I don't know if you're familiar with Metro's North Base, but there's a sports field on top of it. And there certainly could be other things there, but there is an expanse that's an open space. That,
good for them. I didn't even think about that.
yeah, it has potential. Yeah, you can go there and look at it. I'm familiar with it. So barring other questions at this point, Senior Planner Lamb, do you have additional presentation on this topic?
Yeah, so we'll get into the code now. Pull this back up. Okay. So earlier I mentioned that so that we're not here all night going by this line for line. Hopefully y'all would have marked up your memo on certain provisions in the section that you would have questions on. And what I've done is I've just gone through and bolded what I think is more pertinent for our discussion tonight. So anywhere in your memo where there was that blue font for context and background, those are the same sections we'll be talking about tonight. But if you do have questions about sections, I don't want to skip over them because now would be the time to go over those. And I'll just ask, please, just interrupt me because it's hard to see y'all raising your hand. So please just jump in and interrupt me before I move on. And then we'll take breaks in between just to make sure there's not questions. So I'll start with this first section, which is 1248-140 floor area ratio calculations. This is the only bit of code that's existing right now that we're revising. All of the rest of it is all new, brand new code that'll be inserted into the reserve section. And so this is talking about that FAR applicability we were discussing. And it says, this one I'll read line by line. It says essential public facilities as defined by state and local regulations that haven't demonstrated they can't comply with the minimum FAR shall be required to transfer development rights in accordance with the requirements of the new TDR section and in an amount determined by the director, but no less than the difference between the proposed floor area and the minimum floor area required by this chapter. And this is giving discretion to the director in our department to ensure that that this program would be used to meet the activity unit targets. So in particular, that second to last line, in an amount determined by the director, but no less than the difference. So one thing we learned in our pro forma analysis was that square feet doesn't translates differently for different uses. So for one household, we'll say an average, it requires an average of 900 square feet for a decent sized apartment, whereas one job really, like we'll say a retail job, only requires the conversion factor is like 500 square feet or 400 square feet. And so when you go to calculate the amount of certificates required to meet those jobs that would have otherwise been provided if they met the minimum development densities, we need to make up for where they're falling short, and this is what that allows us to do. So we'll just say, for simplicity, if they're required to transfer, if they're only required to transfer, we'll say 10,000 square feet of floor area to meet the jobs that they would have provided. That translates differently for households, so it's going to be a greater amount, and so the director would be able to require that amount to be transferred. So it gets deeper, but that's as we progress, we'll see how this plays out and why it's important. Next slide is the purpose, and we'll go to questions after this before we get into the new code. So I just wanted to read over the purpose to make sure we're all on the same page, and that this captures how Planning Commission envisioned this program, even when y'all were working on the Canyon Park sub-area plan. So the purpose of the TDR program is to advance the goals and policies in the comp plan and sub-area plan regarding affordable housing, local employment, transit accessibility, essential public facilities. It's also intended to help this area fulfill requirements under the PSRC Regional Growth Center framework for planned target densities. So we can stop if y'all think that captures the spirit of the program, then we can move on if it needs to be tweaked at all.
All right, so let's pause for a moment and I'll scroll up and down. I'm not seeing anyone at this point. I'll give it one more shot. So not seeing anyone using the raise hand function or waving at me on the screen.
Okay.
I think we can proceed to your next section.
All right.
And commissioners can always raise questions later if they think of them as we go along.
Okay. Okay, so we'll get in to the definitions. The one bolded here is development rights. And the definition is that they are units of development potential transferable from sending sites that can be used for incentives and receiving sites. And so this is where we switch from that development credits terminology. And so we'll refer to them as certificates from here on out, as captured in number 1 above. 3 and 4 are not bolded. They were in all of this was in your packet, so please do stop me. As well as 5 and 6. While we've got 5 in front of us, I'll just say that I hope letter of intent was clear. It's sort of counterintuitive. Usually you think of a letter of intent as an applicant providing that, but here we're actually saying that the city issues the sending site a letter of intent, telling them the available rights that have been generated and that can be used. So that's an important distinction. Okay, we're at the last end, or the last bit of definitions. And we want to note here that TDR is operationalized as floor area. We've in square feet, not as floor area ratio. So we've already talked about that a little bit. There's a difference that they need to make up to reach that FAR, and it's just easier to think of it in terms of square feet, not FAR. We'll continue on. This is sending sites. We'll have a map in the code that will identify sending sites. It's meant to be flexible so that, if another essential public facility locates in Canyon Park, or this is expanded to a private market, it'll be at some point, based on our discussion, it will be identified on there. Here's an important distinction. It gets at what we discussed earlier. So bear with me. I've got some notes that I'm reading from. So hopefully it comes out clear. So this is an important restriction because technically there's no limit to development if sufficient incentives could be employed. And we talked about that. There's no maximum FAR with incentives. So this is saying the land shall not include improvements that exceed the maximum base FAR for the site. So when we do that accounting exercise for the city, we want to make sure that they haven't built out to that maximum FAR, but have already transferred some rights away. And this just allows us to be able to make sure that's clear. And it is straightforward in the code. I think we need to read about the reasonable use exception. Please stop me if I'm going too fast. And again, if you had something marked up, please do let me know. This is the calculation of development rights that we're getting into now. I don't have this bolded. Don't have this bolded either. And this is more just for to make calculations straightforward for anyone that would be using this. I guess this is more for the city and developers. So certification of development rights for sending sites. So prior to the transfer of any development rights, the owner of a sending site must file an application with the city for the issuance of a letter of intent. We talked about that earlier. The director shall establish the submittal requirements necessary for application and any required forms and fees. Okay, this process is important because it provides an application procedure for the TDR program that confirms the amount of credits available prior to us issuing certificates. So just some protection for the city here. Okay, moving on. Still in the certification of rights for sending sites. And we come to number 4, sending site for which the city has issued a letter of intent shall be limited to uses consistent with the purpose and intent of this section, with the criteria originally used as the basis for issuing the certificate to the sending site. And so the director then can refuse to issue certificates if, say, a developer says, switches up the intent, switches up changes the use. We're not obligated to provide them certificates if it's not consistent with the purpose of the program. Okay. Continue rolling on. We're blowing through this, so
I've been scrolling. I haven't seen anyone.
Yeah, I'm realizing that. So this was all in the memo. I didn't want to have us sit here and read all these line for line. So we'll continue on, and if we need to pull one of these back up that's not bolded, we certainly can.
That's fine. Let's continue.
Okay, so transfer of development rights. Owners of receiving sites may obtain certificates of, rights directly from the owner of a sending site, from a credit bank, or from another intermediary. We touched on this earlier. We inserted intermediary to allow for secondary transfers in the future. So an intermediary might be Arch if it's not coming from a credit bank, in this case, the city. And so this is just allowing us to be able to pivot in the future if that's the intent and the policy that the commission and council would want to establish if it's if this program expands beyond what it is now in its current form. Okay, we'll continue on. These are not bolded. This is not bolded.
Pause for a moment
Okay.
there then. It seems as if this would be the section to look to allow the concept that I thought about. So rather than talking about an intermediary and secondary transfer, if the rights were to be used directly by the developer for the purpose of the program, make sure that's allowable.
Okay. I think we, sorry, I might have only followed that last part there. But I think this tries to cover us there. It says rights directly from the owner of a sending site or from a credit bank or from an intermediary. Did I understand that right, Mr. Chair?
So if a developer is receiving the rights directly and the rights are being used for the purpose of the program, that is to develop affordable housing,
Yeah.
then there wouldn't be necessarily be funds moving through the city for that, because
Right.
the city would be receiving the benefit it was seeking.
Yeah, maybe we can, we might need to beef this section up or, and that was a conversation we had with our assistant city attorney. There's some areas where we would, where we've looped the intent of the program. We've built in language in some provisions to circle back to the intent in that purpose statement. And I think that kind of speaks to what you're getting at. If it's going to be transferred directly, it needs to be for affordable housing. So I'm going to make a note of that and see if we can't beef that up here or maybe add some language somewhere else. So I think that's an important point.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
And scrolling, I'm not seeing anyone else at this point, so I think you can proceed after my.
Yeah, I think we're close to the end. There wasn't a whole lot. We had got through this. You can see, yeah, this is all it's talking about, permits and registries. This is a lot of for the city's administrative use. Okay, here's one for us. The sending site development restrictions. Upon the recording of a TDR easement, the minimum FAR and the maximum base FAR for the sending site shall be decreased by an amount equivalent to the development rights being transferred under a certificate of TDR. So my notes here say this provision operationalizes the loss of development rights on the site. Registration of the easement needs to consider that the development above the maximum base FAR could occur other incentive programs. So y'all picked up on that early on in our discussion, and that's just how we're recording that here to not create a loophole. So I hope that's clear. We can. We've certainly bent our brains thinking about that, but at the end of the day, it's more or less an accounting exercise, and we want to make it as simple as possible, and on the administrative side. Okay, and this is for us as well. Development and sending sites with a recorded TDR easement shall be restricted to essential public facilities within the area of the easement. Okay, so that's, we say this may be necessary to make it clear that it's not intended for private development projects as noted in our other in our phase 1 document that only looks at essential public facilities or contemplates that. So there's some more protection. We've discussed that as well. So we'll continue on. Receiving site incentives. I think this is where we're getting to the parking. Okay, yeah. So I think it was Commissioner Westerbeck that touched on this earlier. Okay, so additional floor area authorized via a TDR certificate that exceeds the maximum FAR is exempted from providing the required minimum off-street parking spaces for the additional floor area. In cases where different parking requirements apply, this exemption shall apply proportionately for the total requirements for the residential and commercial portions of the development. Okay, and so that's consistent with our phase 1 report that we wanted to provide an additional incentive to sort of sweeten the pot. It also separates out incentives between residential and commercial components of parking and ensures that developers won't justify larger reductions by proposing that bonus FAR only applies to uses with higher parking requirements. Okay, so I hope that helps answer the question and provide some clarification for our discussion earlier. And I think that was the end. That is the end. We did provide this process, administrative process for your, just for background information in your memo, but I don't think that we need to discuss that tonight in case, unless anybody else wants to. Unless there's, I think it'd be good if, like I mentioned, if anybody had anything marked up, let me know what's provision it was, and I'll find it in the slides, and we can spend a bit of time talking about it.
All right, I'm scrolling the commissioners. Commissioner Robson.
Thank you. Claire Robson here. I was wondering if, I didn't see it in this document. Does the sending facility or sending property, do they have a fee or receive money when there's a transfer of the credit? Are they called credits? No, credentials. Forgive me, units. Is there a fee or a money received for them?
Other than I don't think we hadn't thought of that, because other than the fee for the application for the program, which we haven't established, there are no fees for them to use the program. But it's a good question. I think our line of thinking this whole time is, we don't want to disincentivize using the program. So if there were other fees besides just for the application and administrative process, that they would be valued, at a reasonable price as to not disincentivize use of the program. So, but that has come up in our discussions, and if I can, I don't think I'll go back to that code section. It is in here. We left it open-ended. We just said forms and fees because we haven't assigned a value to what that would be yet. So I will bring that up in our next discussions, whether maybe we can look at some of the other programs in the region and whether they have fees for their programs.
It may,
hopefully.
as Commissioner Westerbeck said, it may encourage them to be put a little more energy into using the land, using the FAR as, originally requested, if there's a fee on top of it. And then just regarding the additional accounting, depending on, I don't know how burdensome it'll be if we restrict it specifically to public facilities, but it does seem like we should maintain at least some incentive for public facilities to follow the mandated FAR, and if not, at least contribute towards the maintenance of that accounting system.
Yeah. No, yeah, that point well taken. And as you see, it's not going to be a simple. We're trying to make it as simple as possible, but if this is used and an easement is recorded on a property, but the essential public facility comes back and wants to claw those credits back, then it's going to become a little bit more of a difficult math problem. So I can bring that up.
Other commissioners? It would seem to me, if they transferred the rights and if those rights were used by another entity, then there would be no clawback. They're gone. But that.
Oh yeah, for sure. If they're used, that's it. So that square footage is reduced from, they can't use that and to build. But see, here's the problem is they already came in under their minimum requirement. So technically they still have FAR that they can build. And if they want to exceed the maximum FAR, even though they've extinguished rights and somebody else has already used them somewhere else, they would have to go through one of our incentive programs to be able to exceed that maximum FAR. We had started having a bonus incentive system discussion last year, and I think the idea was to get this in place first, and then and further on down the line, if that scenario was to happen, there would be other incentives.
Your audio is
developers could use.
Nathan, I think we might have lost you.
Okay, I'm here. Sorry about that.
Okay. All right, thanks. So Commissioner Robson, a residual hand or another question? All right.
Sorry about that, just a residual hand.
Not a problem. Other commissioners? Commissioner Curd.
Thanks, and thanks for the presentation. I'm kind of blown away at how complicated this whole thing is. And it's not something that I think is going to be widely used either because of how complicated it is. So really what we're doing is basically ameliorating Sound Transit's issue and then spreading it to like maybe 2 other properties. And this seems like a lot of staff time in the future. And I would just kind of, I would echo Commissioner Robson's, what I believe to be your point, which was that there's going to be some resources that the city has to put into in order to facilitate this whole program. And the city staff are busy enough as it is. And so I think that we need to really strongly consider putting a fee on top of this to kind of take back some of the hours that are going to be spent away from normal processes in order to offset that. So I would just kind of, I would support looking at fees for this as well.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful to that other commissioners feel that way too. And in trying to make this so simple, it's just we find that there's these small complications, and I think what we're really trying to do is just give ourselves some protection so that there won't be any loopholes. But yeah, we can certainly look at, like I mentioned before, what if there's any fees that are levied sort of in other places, and what they're commensurate with, with what staff time is, and maybe there's a way to tweak those fees. So again, it's not a disincentive, but also it's kind of providing money that could be channeled into along with proceeds for affordable housing. So yeah, it's a point well taken. I will make sure to.
Okay, and again, you're checking in and out. Audio. Still not clear. And I think you're trying, but we're not hearing.
Can you hear me? I've come in as on my phone.
Yes.
Okay, great.
I can hear you there. So Commissioner Dodd, do you have your hand up?
I do. Super quick. Just wanted to echo what Commissioners Robson and Kurt said. We don't need to make it too easy for organizations to get around the minimum density, because that's been set for a very good reason. So I agree that a fee just to respect staff time and also just, maybe just build the density, however we can sort of push that. I'm a fan of, so thank you.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Westerbeck.
I'm going to chime in and say the same. I really like what Commissioner Robson, sorry, I always forget, it's Robson, not Robson. I'm sorry. I don't want to butcher your name. Said, I think that was really smart because, again, I mentioned earlier, I was not thrilled about Sound Transit throwing around their weight and saying, well, we don't want to build the minimum because we're Sound Transit. And I remember there was even some tough words between council member or two and Sound Transit and some threats. So, you're going to come into an area that we've designated for a minimum amount of density and build below just because you're, a 10,000 pound gorilla. That's not playing nice for a place that needs us, is, probably more than we need them. So I will echo what the other members said, that there probably should be a fee to cover all this time and effort by staff and the costs of running the program. And then finally, related to that, I wonder if, like, after 10 years or something, if no one picks up the credits, if that organization, the sender, Sound Transit in this case, but could be any organization, should have to pay for those credits if they're not used. Because otherwise they just get away with building below capacity. And if the program's so complex and difficult that no one ever picks them up, well, they got what they wanted and we never got the payback. So feels like there should be some sort of a safety valve there for us. They've got to build they can build equivalent affordable housing. They can do another project. They can add to their existing project, or they can buy them back, whatever. So just a safety valve of sort. So we've got so we know that we will be made whole in some way, shape, or form.
And I saw a lot of heads nodding on that. So consider that some feedback, Senior Planner Lamb. Other commissioner comments? All right, not seeing any. Again, this is a study session. We're giving feedback, but not a recommendation at this point. We will have an opportunity to ponder this some more, and then it will come back for a public hearing, correct?
Oops, I was muted. Yeah, that's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and then there will be an action on the part of the commission with findings and recommendations. So a lot of good thoughts were raised here. You might want to keep those in mind as we look at crafting those findings and recommendations down the road. Barring any other interest in feedback on this topic, I would close the study session and move us on to unfinished business. Is there any unfinished business for us tonight?
Not that I'm aware of, Mr. Chairman.
No, nothing from commissioners. All right, our next item is reports from staff. Senior Planner Lamb, do you have some reports for us?
Yeah, that's me again. Okay, and I would like to say thank you very much to the commissioners that weighed in. That was very helpful, and it's nice to hear the support for staff and especially the development review division that would be going through these process steps, and so I'll report that to them too. So thanks very much. So for our reports, I have several that Director Cotterman has helped me put together. So I'm going to read from a script. So the governor's emergency declaration will expire June 1st. Now we know that. And our council hasn't been able to obviously have a discussion about what that means. May 17th is when they will have that discussion. But we can anticipate that probably for the 1st of June, we will be hybrid. And so commissioners don't have to participate in person, but we will at least have to provide an option where commissioners can call in, and same for the public. I regretfully reporting that Director Cotterman's last day is May 13th next week. And Jeff Smith, who has been in the community development department at Bothell for 30 years, is our interim director right now. And he'll be at a future meeting to meet you all. And so we're going through a little bit of reorganization right now, but I'm happy to announce that we have a new deputy director for our department, Ashley Winchell, and she's coming to us from Linwood, and she'll be at one of our next meetings as well, so you can meet her. She worked for Linwood for 4 years as the planning manager, and she oversees both current and long-range planning work. She previously was in Kansas City, Missouri, doing some land use and design review, and worked with sub-area plans and public engagement. Her background is a master's degree in preservation from Tulane University, and a bachelor's in urban planning and design from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. So we're looking forward to onboarding her in June. And then also, I don't know if the director got a chance to update you all on, you probably heard Kyle Stanner is our new city manager. He has 16 years of municipal leadership experience. He's currently the deputy city manager at the city of Fort Collins in Colorado, where he's responsible for a portfolio of community-facing services focused on affordable housing, sustainability, and parks. He was also the co-lead in creating the city's first DEI office, and helped align city operations with priorities of the city council and the community during the budget process. Prior to that, he was actually in Bellevue for some time, where he served as in some senior roles with the city. He was assistant city manager with Bellevue, and he led some reorganization efforts there as well and worked on some high profile project. So the city is certainly happy to have him on board. So now I'll get into the more mundane updates. We want to send a friendly reminder for commissioners to be checking their city inboxes for any mail that's coming from staff or from the public. The Canyon Park sub area plan was certified by PSRC finally last week. And so that's really good. And our engineers are happy about that. If Steve was here, he would express his happiness for it because that helps them compete for dollars. So we were happy to get that past the finish line. Dave and our senior planner, Dave Boyd, and our community engagement specialist, Sarah Frost, are organizing a middle housing online presentation Q&A. It's going to be the same night as the bike plan open house. There's going to be a little bit of overlap, but please do mark your calendars for that so you can participate. Do I have anything else? I think that is it. And then,
We have a question from Commissioner Dodd, if you want to pause for a moment.
Okay, sure. And I just had one more after that, and then that wraps it up.
I'm sorry, I was gonna try and give you a smooth exit to the meeting, but I totally appreciate, and I know that I can't even appreciate how hard it is to schedule all these public meetings and all the notices and all the city stuff going on. But if there's any way not to have those two meetings overlap, my goodness, like I feel like there's a lot of, I mean, even just amongst commissioners, but amongst the public, a lot of people interested in it. It seems like a bit of a misstep if I'm thinking about it. So if we can have the bike plan and the missing middle meeting not overlap, that would be great. Also, 2 Zooms in one night is a lot for people. I mean, we're all at this sort of like stage 400 of the pandemic Zoom exhaustion level. So whatever we can do there, if there's anything, I just wanted to give a shout out to maybe not having them on the same night is all. Thank you.
Sure thing. I'll pass the word along, and maybe we can push that back so that folks can have a break in between. So thank you.
And I expressed a concern to Director Cotterman as well that we've overlapped with other bike plan meetings before.
Okay.
Like that's been a thing. So
okay, I'll make sure to communicate.
One more overlap before we take it personally, right? I'm kidding.
I'll let them know. And then the last update that I had was it's Affordable Housing Week next week that is being put on by the King County Housing Development Consortium. And if you go on their website, they have a whole slew of events and webinars that they'll be holding. And so I encourage the commissioners to check that out. And I think that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. So thank you for the time.
All right, thank you for those updates and reports. Our next item is reports from members. Do we have some reports? And I thought we had one listening to the video that might be continued over. Looking across, any member? Commissioner Curd.
Hey, it's me with a report from members. So a couple of things. One is that I went to it was a webinar about tree canopy, and it was very informative. It was put on by it's the Snohomish County Conservation District. And so Bothell pays into that, and they are elected officials. Anyway, the webinar really underscored the need for a strong tree canopy in terms of stormwater mitigation. And so it was really informative. There were a lot of resources. And so I will, once I get the email with all the resources, I'll forward that along to staff and they can disperse that out. So that was the update from that.
Thank you, Commissioner Curd. Other reports from members? Looking across, Commissioner Dodd creeping into the screen there.
I hate to do it when we have a longer meeting, but I call out congrats to Commissioner Curd for joining most of the rest of us, as far as I'm aware, in the land of home ownership, moving from Lower Maywood to Valley View. Sorry about the prices you'll have to pay for that. Good night. But it does bring up something where Commissioner Curd has been one of the lone renter voices on our commission. And I think it's important that we don't lose that voice, in the sense that whenever we do outreach, I think that's an important voice to hear, because I know even just hearing about his housing search, just, person to person, it was so different from mine in 2018 and 2014 and what I hear of my parents in 1993. So just the different phases of coming into Bothell and finding housing, are so different, but you really do lose touch if you don't have a close friend looking for housing now, because the market just changes like crazy. So however we can continue to hear those voices, even if they're not direct commission members. Not that I'm saying we should kick off a homeowner and put a renter in, but just those are important voices to hear, because our policy does affect housing affordability and excludes a lot of people from homeownership in the state of housing in our city right now. So just something to keep in mind as we sort of lose that voice. I don't want to be anything but congratulatory to you, Commissioner Curd, but we are losing sort of that direct dial into the renting community. So just food for thought and congrats at the same time.
Thanks. If I could respond, Chair.
Please do.
So thank you so much. Yes. And you all have kind of heard about my struggle. I've vented a little bit on the commission, so thank you for listening. I'm excited to remain in the city, and just because I am a singular success story doesn't mean that so many others in our city are struggling under the weight of housing costs. And so it just kind of underscores the need to continue fighting for affordable housing and missing middle. And that's something that I'm excited to partner with all of you for. So thanks.
Yeah, well, thanks for providing that perspective historically. And I would say from my previous life in employment, that reaching out to that community, the renter community, or what we call the multifamily housing community, tends to be more challenging. Often that's a more transient community. Often there are people who are challenged in finding time to participate in things like this. So it does really warrant an extra effort. And I'm sure that the city's community involvement, I'm not saying anything that she doesn't know or hasn't heard, but I do think it's important for us to recognize that it's a community that may not have the resources and the time and the input that some of us do. So just a thought there. Commissioner Dodd.
I'm sorry. I don't know why I have so much to say right at the end. I think the other thing too, having been a renter, not super recently, but there's a lot of people in the city who get, we see this on social media, people think, oh, they built an apartment complex there and now there's more crime. Like, that's a weird refrain that doesn't always match up with, reality. Especially it depends on, is there more crime or is there more crime per capita? Boy, I could just get into that if I wanted to. But it's something to keep in mind that has there been over time the willingness for residents who own homes to listen to residents who rent, right? Like, I can see where residents who rent might be a lot less inclined to speak up because there's probably been a lot of pushback they've gotten from folks as they do. So just however we can work to indicate a willingness to listen, I think is super important. So I will stop, I promise. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Other reports from members? Seeing none. Items to report to council. Oh, did I?
I'm so sorry. I have one more. I recall that last meeting, Director Cotterman asked me to prepare a short presentation on missing middle, and I didn't get to that. So I will present that at a future date. Thanks.
Yes, that's what I was kind of subtly alluding to. Thank you. I understand you're very busy. We will appreciate your what you bring to us when you have the opportunity to do that. So thank you. Anything else from members? Looking around the squares. All right, seeing none. Items to report to council. Is there anything that we want to bring to council coming out of this? This is on our agenda because it's on their agenda. So Commissioner Dodd.
Hi. I don't know that we have any renters I can think of on council. Thinking through really quick, I might be missing one. I don't think I am, but that's something that they could take heart with too, is just those voices are important and missing a lot of the time, and missing from their body and now missing from our body. And I wonder how many other boards and commissions have sort of a lack of renters, and not even so much a lack of renters, it's just a lack of people who've had to seek housing sort of in the recent past. The further you get from that search, the easier it is to be like, oh, it was kind of fun, I got to do a tour, you know, and think of it more as like a House Hunters episode instead of like, where am I going to live, you know? So I think that if we can, it doesn't have to be a whole thing where you go just to remind them of that, but if we can add that to whatever list we may have for the future, you know, it's important, I think. And I really will stop now. Thank you.
All right, yeah, that's good feedback. I know that some council members do watch this, some of them on a faster speed, so it is there. But yeah, I agree that it's an important perspective that is difficult to bring into government. And I can say that from personal experience, having tried to get that in. So, all right. There being no further items to report to council, is there a motion to adjourn? Commissioner Dodd.
I move to adjourn the meeting.
Second. Commissioner Curd.
I second.
All right, all in favor. So that being done, we will adjourn the May 4th meeting of the Bothell Planning Commission at 9:02 this evening. Our next meeting is May 18th, and with just a little bit of luck, that'll be our last fully remote meeting. So look forward to seeing you all soon. Everybody have a good night, and go Sounders.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye.
Good night. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Tell Mike he
Bye.
has to stop by one of our in-person meetings at some point.